those of you who are joining me on TikTok and YouTube, I'll be starting in just a bit. Tonight's lecture is going to be on racial trauma and intergenerational stress. As I mentioned before, this is a continuation of the series for this particular week. This is week 5 in my class, which is Roots of Racism, Bias, Prejudice, and Systemic Oppression. And we're just kind of continuing on this theme for this particular week. And this week, so yesterday I talked about racial battle fatigue. And today, this is the second lecture out of 3, and this one's on racial trauma and intergenerational stress. So just kind of putting it out there for anybody who isn't familiar with the class. This class has been going on for 5 weeks now. Started pretty much that first week of Hillman Talk, and we're just kind of getting into it, and we're just continuing the conversation. So just a recap, for the first week, we set some of the foundations and understanding what racism is, what bias is, what prejudice is, what is discrimination. We talked about the whole concept of reverse racism. Then in week 2, we went into Michelle Alexander's The New Jim Crow. And from there, we went into Bias by Jennifer Eberhardt. And we also watched the film 13th by Ava DuVernay. And then we went into week 4, going into Brian Stevenson's Just Mercy. And for those who are able to watch Just Mercy, it was a very powerful thing to watch and to kind of gain, this understanding of what Black people have to go through in this country. So today we're going to go ahead and get into it with regards to the racial trauma and the generational stress. And this picks up off of the first lecture that I did yesterday, which was racial battle fatigue and the hidden toll of everyday racism. So I'm a bit late, and I was hoping to start at 9:30, but as I mentioned to people, this is we are in the middle of Ramadan, and this is those nights of prayer and fasting and everything else. And I had my little boy with me, but also today has been a very rough day for me. So one of my childhood friends that's been a very, very close friend of mine passed away last night. And it just really hit me like a ton of bricks. And so part of the day I was dealing with trying to get my daughter to the ER to get a Lego stuff from up under her nose. And then the other part of the day was just dealing with the grief of losing a friend. And I had just talked to my friend just recently. So I've been kind of grieving today, really been hurt. This was somebody from my high school years. We spent a lot of time together. She got me my first job, used to go over her house. So I'm still kind of dealing with that, but I wanted to make sure I keep my word in saying that I was going to go ahead and do this lecture. So for those of you guys that are here, let's kind of go into it, and I'm going to try to get through the lecture as much as possible. I appreciate you guys being here because you didn't have to take off out of your day. Same to you, Crystal. So you didn't have to take off out of your day to join. So let's go ahead and get into it. So if you were here with me yesterday, you remember we talked about racial battle fatigue and that everyday exhaustion that comes from constantly navigating discrimination and microaggression. This is something that if you're a person of color and if you are somebody that is Black, you have to deal with this all the time. And let's be clear, that kind of stress is real. It's measurable. It doesn't just sit in your head. It sits in your body. It wears on your spirit. But today we're going to take that conversation a bit further, because racial trauma is not just what happens to one person in one moment. And this is something that we really got into yesterday. It's about something bigger. It's about history. It's about memory. It's about what gets passed down. And I remember one person had mentioned epigenetics, and this is something that we're going to talk about today. So now in this country, we like to tell ourselves that history is the past, that we've moved on, that what happened back then has nothing to do with what's happening now. But if we're being honest with ourselves, we know that's not true, because the reality is trauma doesn't disappear. It lingers, it echoes. And this is something I kind of harped on because wherever we go, the hypervigilance that we still feel it when we go into places of business, whether we're being followed around or if there's a police car and stuff behind us, we still feel it. But the thing is, as I said, this is passed down. This is, like I said, it echoes. And when we see this play out in a concept called intergenerational stress, the idea like trauma, especially racial trauma, can be passed down from generation to generation. So you take a people who were enslaved, who were segregated, who were systematically excluded from opportunities, who were lynched for daring to exist as free human beings. And then you ask their children, why are you still struggling? Well, if you spend generations surviving oppression, if your grandparents had to fight just to read a book, if your parents had to fight just to sit at a lunch counter, it shapes you. Or even if you just had to fight to be taken seriously at work, don't you think that does something to you? It shapes how you see the world. It shapes how you move through it. And in some cases, it even changes your body at a genetic level. So this is one of those things that I haven't gotten a chance to get into, but this is something that scientists have been studying for a long time, and that is epigenetics. This is the idea that trauma just doesn't affect your mind. It affects how your genes express themselves. And this isn't speculation. This is real science. This isn't just some junk science like eugenics. This is real science. Researchers have found that stress, deep, sustained, generational stress can leave a mark on your DNA. It doesn't change the genetic code itself, but it influences how genes are activated or suppressed. And we've seen this before. So you look at, have you seen like studies on Holocaust survivors? It showed changes in stress-related genes in their children. And studies of descendants of enslaved Africans, well, it shows similar patterns as well. And so when folks say, why can't you just get over it? Because Lord knows that Black people have heard that all too long throughout history. Why can't you just get over it? You're not enslaved anymore. What they fail to realize is that this isn't just about memory. It's about biology. It's about inheritance. The stress of racism is literally carried in our bodies. So let's bring this back to the present. Because racial trauma is not just about history, it's about right now. So we see it in the Black mother who teaches her son how to survive a police encounter because she knows what happens when you don't. Or the indigenous family carrying the pain of forced assimilation, residential schools, lost languages, the Latino worker feeling the weight of anti-immigrant rhetoric every time he or she steps outside. Or even in the Asian American elder who flinches every time she walks down the street because she remembers a time not so long ago when people spat on her for being other. And don't forget about the internment camps, that there's a lot of other Asian elders who've gone through that. So this is racial trauma. This is what gets passed down. And it's not just emotional, it's physical. We see higher rates of hypertension, heart disease, mental health struggles in communities of color, not because of genetics, but because of the stress, the discrimination, the obstacles built into the system. That is not a coincidence. That is the cost of racism. And again, like I always ask, what do we do? Because acknowledging racial trauma, that's the first step, but it's not the last. I've always talked about whenever I'm going to discuss something with regards to any of the stuff that I teach, there's always going to be a question of what do we do? Because the healing just doesn't happen on the individual level. It happens in the community. It's great that we can go out here and we can find a therapist or a counselor to talk to, but that's individual. What do we do as a community? So therapy, and not just any therapy, but therapy that understands the realities of racism. Therapy that is culturally competent, trauma informed. One of the resources that I use when I go out there and I'm in the community, especially with Black women, I say go to therapyforblackgirls.com. It is a wonderful resource. Make sure you are taking advantage of that resource and you go there and you find somebody to talk to, because guess what? Whether you're dealing with or not dealing with, you are still going to deal with it. Your body is still going to deal with it. Your genes are still going to deal with it. But we also have storytelling, because when we speak our truths, when we share our histories, we remind each other that we're not crazy, that we're not weak. We are survivors. And this is one of the things I tell Black people, that they go out there and they share their stories and they tell people about what's going on with them. And this is why I tell other people who are in the majority in this country that they need to listen. They need to really sit back and they need to listen attentively to these stories and what's going on, to the history of the people in this country. Because if you're not willing to listen, then you're not willing to learn either. And then we also got to work on that policy change, because at the end of the day, we can meditate, we can journal, we can go to therapy. But if we don't change the systems that created this trauma in the first place, then we're just putting a Band-Aid on a bullet wound. And that's the reality. So what I'm hopefully going to leave you guys with today is that racial trauma is real. It's deep. It is generational. But so is resilience. Because if there's one thing history has shown us, it's that we have always found ways to rise. We have always found ways to rise. We have always found ways to push forward, to move on, to pull ourselves up. We have always found it. We have fought. We have built. We have created joy in the face of pain, community in the face of division, hope in the face of despair. And that is how we move forward. We heal, we fight, and we refuse to forget. This is how we push forward. I know tonight is a bit short, and like I said, I'm kind of dealing with a lot of things today, and I appreciate everybody who was able to spend some time here and be here tonight, because I started a little bit late, as I mentioned, but I do appreciate everybody showing up, everybody listening, everybody giving feedback. And, for those of you who are here, if you could say a prayer for my friend Rhonda. For me, it's somebody that I'm going to miss. I'm going to miss dearly. And even when I forget, when I forgot to call her, she was calling me. And, there are so many times that I would spend the night over her house, or we would be doing security at Bronco Bowl or at an Earth, Wind, and Fire concert or something else, Gypsy Kings. I remember all that. But just know that, there are people that's in your life. They're not going to be guaranteed to be here tomorrow. There are people in your life that's going to disappear. And I know quite a few of us have probably felt that during COVID. That we had people in our lives at one point in time, then COVID came, and then they were no longer in our lives. I lost people who were friends in college, ex-girlfriends that passed away from COVID and everything else. And it's just like trauma after trauma, that we constantly have to be in the state of loss at times. And so this is just a reminder from myself. That has nothing to do with the class. Make sure you're telling the people that are in your lives that you love them. Make sure that they know that you love them. Make sure if you haven't been in contact with somebody that you reach out to them. Because even though we're still here, we're still having to deal with the here and now, whether we're dealing with the racial trauma or anything else, racial battle fatigue, or any of the stuff that I'm talking about. Just know that we still have this to deal with. But those people that are in our lives, they're not here forever. And I'm tired of losing friends, but the only thing that I can tell you is just let your people know that you love them, because you might not get a chance to do so tomorrow. So that's my reminder for tonight. Does anybody have any questions on tonight's lecture or even yesterday's lecture, so that I can answer any questions possible before we get into the third lecture for tomorrow. So tomorrow is going to be around the same time, hopefully 9:30. I show up on time. Tomorrow's lecture, let me see, what did I have for tomorrow's lecture? Oh, systemic racism, mental health, and resistance. So tomorrow's lecture is going to be a little bit longer, only because mental health is one of my strong points. It's the thing that I spend a lot of time with. I do a lot of lectures in the Baltimore, D.C. area. So I'm at Goucher College, University of Maryland, Morgan State University. I'm be at United Way in a few weeks. I'm always doing lectures just on the mental health aspects of things. So I just want to know, if anybody have any questions, ask now. But just know that tomorrow's lecture might be a little bit longer, because I'm probably going to talk about mental health and the impacts of racism on mental health tomorrow, because I can assure you, you have to deal with it. Whether you're a Black person of color, Indigenous, Latino, or even if you're white, because there is a hidden cost to being white and watching racism be impacted on other people as well, especially if you're an empath. So just know that I'm gonna kind of get into it tomorrow. We're gonna really get into the mental health aspects of things. And if there are no questions for right now, I wish you all peace. I wish you all a good night, and hopefully we can pick up tomorrow. And for those of you who are in my class on Google Classroom, for those of you who are not, you can get to Google Classroom by the link in my profile. And for those of you in my classroom, I look forward to picking up where I left off. I still have papers to grade, discussions to reply to. It's coming. If it's not one thing, it's the next, and something is always going on. But otherwise, you guys have a good night. I appreciate you. Thank you very much, and take care.